Affection is often celebrated as an unbreakable bond, a force capable of overcoming all obstacles. But what happens when that bond is rooted in secrets and lies? In this tale, a union meant to mark the beginning of a new life together spirals into a nightmare of betrayal and violence. Set in a quiet, upscale neighborhood, this gripping story unfolds within the walls of what should have been a perfect wedding, where joy and anticipation conceal the dark truths waiting to be uncovered. And welcome to Michael's Story Hub. To our viewers and loyal subscribers, thank you for your unwavering support as we bring you daily narratives of true crime, both the widely known and the hidden tales. If you're new here, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more enthralling stories that captivate. And Kayla. This is the story of Sophia, Nathaniel, and Kayla, three people whose lives are about to be forever changed by the choices they've made and the truths they've hidden. Our story centers around three individuals: Nathaniel, the devoted groom; Sophia, the beautiful bride; and Kayla, her best friend and maid of honor. And Nathaniel, three lives intertwined by fate and friendship. But beneath the surface of this close-knit bond lies a hidden truth. Sophia and Kayla share a connection far deeper than anyone knows. A connection that threatens to unravel everything on this fateful night. As Sophia stands at the altar, she is torn between the life she is about to commit to with Nathaniel and the secret life she has been living with Kayla. A secret that, once uncovered, will shatter everything in its wake. Every story has its beginning, a place where bonds are formed, secrets are kept, and lives intertwine. This story begins with a friendship, one that stretches back through years of shared experiences, laughter, and unspoken understanding. Sophia and Kayla were more than just companions. They were each other's confidants, allies in a world that often felt too large and too overwhelming to face alone. From the outside, their relationship seemed like any other: close, supportive, unwavering. But beneath the surface there was something more. Something that neither of them could fully acknowledge, let alone reveal. As the years passed, their bond only grew stronger. They were inseparable, the kind of friends who could finish each other's sentences, who understood each other's thoughts without a word being spoken. When Nathaniel entered the picture, he was welcomed into their tight-knit circle. He saw two women who cared deeply for each other, and he was drawn to their closeness, believing it to be a sign of Sophia's capacity for love and loyalty. But what he didn't see, what he couldn't see, were the moments when Sophia and Kayla would exchange a look, a touch, a word that carried a weight he would never understand. As the wedding day approached, Sophia found herself struggling with an anxiety she couldn't shake. She loved Nathaniel, she truly did, but there was something else, something that had been lurking in the shadows for far too long, waiting to be confronted. Kayla could see it too. The way Sophia's smile no longer reached her eyes, the way her laughter seemed forced, hollow. Nathaniel, in his happiness, was blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. But to understand the true depth of this story, we must go back to a time before the engagement, before the wedding preparations, to a moment when everything changed. It was a night like any other, or so it seemed. Sophia and Kayla were alone, as they often were, sharing a quiet evening after a long day. But something was different this time. Something unspoken hung in the air between them. It had always been there, this tension, this unacknowledged connection, but they had never dared to cross that line. Yet on this night they did. A glance lingered a moment too long, a hand brushed against a shoulder with more intent than usual, and suddenly the boundary that had kept them safe, that had kept their relationship simple, was shattered. What followed was a night of confusion, passion, and fear. They were no longer just friends. They had become something else, something they couldn't easily define, and something they knew they could never reveal. In the days and weeks that followed, they kept their secret buried deep, hidden from the world and from Nathaniel. But with every stolen moment, every secret meeting, the weight of their deception grew heavier. Sophia was torn between two worlds, the life she had always known, the life she was expected to live, and the life she had glimpsed, one filled with a love that was as terrifying as it was consuming. Kayla felt it too, the dread of what they had done, and the even greater dread of what would happen if the truth ever came to light. As the wedding day drew nearer, the tension between Sophia and Kayla became impossible to ignore. They tried to act as if nothing had changed, as if their relationship was the same as it had always been. But they both knew it wasn't. Sophia's behavior became erratic, her mood swinging wildly from joy to despair, from excitement to fear. She threw herself into the wedding preparations with a fervor that surprised everyone, but those closest to her could see the cracks beginning to form. Caleb, meanwhile, was a picture of calm on the outside, but inside she was a storm of emotions: love, guilt, jealousy, and an overwhelming sense of loss. Nathaniel, in his blissful ignorance, was focused on the details of the wedding: the suit, the vows, the guest list. He was filled with excitement and anticipation, dreaming of the life he was about to begin with the woman he loved. He didn't see the way Sophia would stare off into the distance when she thought no one was watching, didn't notice how her hands would tremble slightly when she spoke of the future. He couldn't understand the way she would sometimes pull away from his touch, as if she were afraid of something or someone. And then there were the moments between Sophia and Kayla, moments that were almost imperceptible but that spoke volumes. A glance held a fraction too long, a hand lingering on a shoulder, a whisper shared in the quiet of a crowded room. These moments were brief, fleeting, but they were enough to stir a sense of unease in those who noticed them. Kayla was struggling too, caught between her love for Sophia and her fear of what was to come. She knew the wedding would change everything, knew that once the vows were spoken, their relationship, whatever it had become, would have to end. The wedding day was looming on the horizon like a storm cloud, dark and ominous, threatening to destroy everything in its path. Sophia was caught in a web of her own making, and she knew that no matter what she did, no matter which path she chose, someone was going to get hurt. She just didn't know how much or how soon. The wedding day, a day meant to be filled with joy and celebration, had finally arrived. Sophia stood at the altar, her heart pounding, not with the excitement one would expect, but with a gnawing anxiety that threatened to consume her. As she watched Nathaniel walk down the aisle, every step he took felt like another nail in the coffin of the life she thought she should be living. Kayla was there, just a few feet away, standing as Sophia's maid of honor, a role she had played for years in more ways than one. But today that title felt heavier than ever. Sophia's mind raced as she recited her vows, the words feeling hollow in her mouth. She glanced at Kayla, who forced a smile, but Sophia could see the pain in her eyes, the silent struggle as she watched the woman she loved marry someone else. The ceremony continued as expected. Vows were exchanged, rings were slipped onto fingers, and the couple was pronounced husband and wife. But for Sophia, each word, each gesture was a painful reminder of the truth she had been hiding and the love she could never openly claim. At the reception, the mood was jubilant, but Sophia was far from it. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, torn between the life she had just committed to and the intense connection with Kayla that had sparked only recently. Nathaniel, glowing with happiness, was oblivious to the storm brewing inside his new wife. But as the night wore on, even he began to notice Sophia was distant. her smiles forced, her laughter hollow. Kayla, too, was struggling. Every congratulatory toast, every smile she offered felt like a dagger in her heart. She and Sophia exchanged brief, tense glances throughout the night, their shared secret hanging over them like a dark cloud. The day, filled with love and celebration for everyone else, was a bittersweet reminder for Sophia and Kayla of the truth they were trying so desperately to bury. As the reception began to wind down, Sophia's unease became more apparent. Nathaniel noticed how she seemed distracted, her mind somewhere far away. He tried to brush it off as exhaustion from the day's events, but something about her demeanor didn't sit right with him. Sophia had always been attentive and loving, but tonight she was distant, almost detached. Every time he tried to engage her, her responses were curt, her eyes wandering around the room as if searching for something or someone. The truth was, Sophia couldn't stop thinking about Kayla. The affair, a recent and unexpected development, had thrown her into turmoil. The connection between them had ignited in the days leading up to the wedding, and now, on what should have been the happiest day of her life, Sophia was overwhelmed with guilt and confusion. She had tried to focus on Nathaniel, to be the wife he deserved, but her mind kept drifting back to Kayla, and the guilt was eating away at her. The weight of her double life was becoming unbearable. As the night wore on, Sophia's anxiety grew. She knew she needed to talk to Kayla to try and resolve the turmoil inside her, but she couldn't do it here, not with Nathaniel watching. Kayla, meanwhile, was battling her own demons. The affair had been brief but intense, a whirlwind of emotions that neither had been prepared for. Seeing Sophia with Nathaniel was more painful than she had imagined. Every smile, every touch between the newlyweds felt like a reminder of what she could never have. Kayla could see the conflict in Sophia's eyes, the way she avoided looking at Nathaniel too long, the way her gaze kept finding Kayla across the room. They had spent weeks hiding their relationship, but tonight the strain of that secrecy was becoming too much to bear. The tension between them was palpable, noticed only by those who knew where to look. As the evening wound down, Sophia and Nathaniel retired to their bridal suite. Nathaniel was still basking in the joy of the day, looking forward to a romantic night with his new wife. But Sophia couldn't bring herself to engage. The thought of being intimate with Nathaniel felt wrong, like she was betraying not just him but also Kayla. She made excuses, saying she was exhausted from the day, that the stress of the wedding had taken its toll. Nathaniel, though disappointed, accepted her explanation. He kissed her goodnight, trying to be understanding, but the seed of doubt had already been planted in his mind. Sophia lay beside Nathaniel, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She knew she was hurting him, that he deserved more than what she could give, but she couldn't bring herself to pretend. The guilt, the fear, the love she felt for Kayla, it was all too much. She couldn't sleep, her thoughts too loud, too overwhelming. After what felt like hours of tossing and turning, Sophia made a decision. She needed to talk to Kayla to try and make sense of the mess they had created. Maybe, if they could talk, she could finally settle her mind, find some peace, and figure out how to move forward. Unable to sleep, Sophia quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Nathaniel. The halls of the hotel were dark and silent, the quiet only amplifying the turmoil inside her as she walked toward Kayla's room. Her heart pounded in her chest, not with anticipation, but with fear. She needed to talk to Kayla, to try and find a way to resolve the tension that had been building between them for weeks. The closer she got to the door, the heavier her steps felt, as if her body was trying to stop her from reaching her destination. When she finally knocked on Kayla's door, there was a long, agonizing pause before it opened. Kayla stood there, her eyes filled with the same turmoil Sophia felt. She was dressed only in her underwear, the vulnerability of the moment stark and undeniable. They didn't need words. They both knew why Sophia was there. Sophia stepped inside, the door closing behind her with a finality that made her heart sink. They sat down, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Sophia tried to start the conversation, to talk about what had happened, to find a way to move forward without destroying everything. But the words wouldn't come. The room was filled with a heavy silence, each woman lost in her own thoughts, unable to break the tension that hung between them. Finally, Sophia spoke. She confessed her love for Kayla, admitting that she couldn't let go, that she didn't know how to move on with Nathaniel while her heart still belonged to someone else. She asked Kayla the same question she had been asking herself. What were they supposed to do now? But before they could find any answers, the emotions that had been building all night finally erupted. The need to feel something, to find some kind of release from the pain and confusion, took over, and in a moment of weakness they gave in to the desire that had been simmering beneath the surface. The affair, which had begun only recently, unfolded in the darkness of Kayla's room, both women fully aware of the consequences but unable to stop themselves. It was a brief, desperate attempt to hold on to something they knew they were about to lose. But just as quickly as it began, it was over, leaving them both with a deeper sense of guilt and dread. Sophia pulled away, her mind racing with thoughts of Nathaniel, of the life she had just promised him, of the future that now seemed more uncertain than ever. As the reality of what they had done began to sink in, Sophia knew she couldn't go back to the bridal suite. She couldn't face Nathaniel with the weight of what had just happened pressing down on her. She sat on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. Kayla, too, was lost in thought, realizing that they had crossed a line they could never uncross. The night, which had started with such promise, had turned into a nightmare from which there was no escape. Meanwhile, Nathaniel stirred in his sleep. He reached out for Sophia, but when his hand touched the cold, empty side of the bed, he jolted awake. Panic set in as he realized she wasn't there. He called her name, his voice trembling, but there was no response. His heart raced as he slipped out of bed, pulling on his robe as he left the room. The hotel was eerily quiet, the only sound his soft footsteps echoing through the hallway. A sense of dread filled him as he walked, his mind racing with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Nathaniel's intuition led him to Kayla's room. He hesitated outside the door, a knot forming in his stomach as he raised his hand to knock. He knocked once. Nothing. He knocked again, harder this time, still nothing. With each unanswered knock, his anxiety grew, his mind racing with fear and suspicion. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open. Kayla stood there, her eyes wide with surprise and guilt, dressed only in her underwear. The sight was enough to send a shockwave through Nathaniel. He didn't need to see Sophia to know what had happened. The truth, which had been lurking in the shadows, was now staring him in the face, undeniable and devastating. The woman he had just married, the woman he thought he knew, had betrayed him in the worst way possible. And in that moment, Nathaniel's world came crashing down. The door creaked open, and Nathaniel stood frozen in the doorway, his mind struggling to process the scene before him. Kayla standing there in her underwear, guilt written all over her face, and just beyond her, Sophia, his wife of only a few hours, seated on the edge of the bed, her face a mask of shame and despair. The truth that had been gnawing at the edges of Nathaniel's consciousness now crashed into him with full force. betrayal, humiliation, rage, they all surged through him at once, a tidal wave of emotions too powerful to control. Nathaniel's voice trembled as he demanded answers, his words sharp and venomous. Sophia, desperate and cornered, tried to explain, but the words caught in her throat. Kayla, equally terrified, could only watch as the situation spiraled out of control. Nathaniel's anger boiled over, his hands shaking as he pointed accusingly at Sophia, his voice growing louder and more frantic with each word. The betrayal cut deeper than he could have ever imagined, and with each passing second the pain turned into something darker, something more dangerous. In a moment of overwhelming emotion, Nathaniel lunged at Sophia, his fury driving his actions. The room erupted into chaos, the tension that had been building all night finally snapping. Sophia tried to hold him back, her voice pleading for him to calm down, but the words fell on deaf ears. The betrayal had shattered something inside Nathaniel, something that could never be repaired. Kayla, caught between her love for Sophia and her guilt over the affair, could do nothing but watch in horror as the confrontation escalated, the situation spiraling out of control faster than anyone could stop it. As the confrontation reached its peak, Nathaniel's emotions overwhelmed him completely. In a moment of blind rage, he grabbed the nearest object, a heavy decorative lamp, and swung it with all his strength. The room fell into a stunned silence as the lamp connected with Sophia's head, the impact sending her crashing to the floor. Blood pooled quickly around her, and for a split second, time seemed to freeze. Kayla rushed to Sophia's side, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. The damage was done, and Sophia's lifeless eyes stared back at her, the horror of what had just happened sinking in. Nathaniel stood frozen, the reality of his actions slowly dawning on him, but the rage had not yet fully subsided. In his grief and madness, he turned to Kayla, blaming her for everything that had happened, for destroying the life he had just begun. The pain, the humiliation, the loss. They all converged in his mind, and before he could stop himself, he lashed out again, his hands fueled by a desperate need to end the nightmare. Kayla, caught off guard, barely had time to react before Nathaniel's attack landed. The room descended into madness as Nathaniel's grief and rage consumed him, the sound of his sobs mingling with the desperate pleas from Kayla, who could see the end coming but was powerless to stop it. The second blow struck Kayla down, her body collapsing beside Sophia's, the blood from both women mingling on the cold, unforgiving floor. And then there was silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to echo the finality of what had just occurred. Nathaniel stood in the middle of the room, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his mind struggling to comprehend what he had done. The lamp slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor beside the two lifeless bodies that had once been his wife and her best friend. The enormity of his actions hit him like a physical blow, the reality of the situation setting in with a cold, harsh clarity. Frantic, Nathaniel dropped to his knees beside Sophia, his hands trembling as he reached out to her, trying to shake her awake, as if you could simply get up and this nightmare would be over. Her body shook, but Sophia didn't move, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. The horror of what he had done washed over him in waves. His cries grew louder, more desperate, as he realized there was no undoing what had just happened. The woman he had loved, the woman he had vowed to spend his life with, was gone, taken by his own hand in a moment of uncontrollable rage. Kayla lay beside her, her face twisted in an expression of shock and fear, her body just as still, just as cold. Nathaniel's mind raced, his thoughts tumbling over one another in a desperate attempt to find a way out, a way to fix what he had done. He looked around the room, his eyes wild, searching for something, anything that could make this all go away. But there was nothing, no escape. no way to undo the devastation he had wrought. The blood on his hands, on the floor, on the walls, it was all too real, too final. In his despair, Nathaniel tried to clean up, his hands frantically scrubbing at the blood, his sobs echoing off the walls. But it was no use. The blood wouldn't come off, and with each passing moment, the futility of his efforts became more and more apparent. The room, once a place of celebration, was now a scene of horror, the remnants of a love that had been twisted and shattered beyond recognition. Exhausted and broken, Nathaniel collapsed on the floor beside Sophia and Kayla, his body shaking with uncontrollable sobs. The realization of what he had done, of what he had lost, settled over him like a heavy, suffocating blanket. He was alone now, completely and utterly alone, with nothing but the echoes of his own actions to keep him company. The weight of the choices he had made, the life he had destroyed, pressed down on him, leaving him with only one question: what now? As the first rays of dawn began to filter through the curtains, Nathaniel knew there was no escaping the consequences of his actions. Whether to flee or to surrender, he didn't know. But one thing was certain: his life, once so full of promise and love, was now irreparably changed, shattered beyond repair by a single, brutal night. The night that began with the promise of a lifetime together had ended in unspeakable tragedy. What was meant to be a celebration of love, commitment, and a new beginning instead became a night of betrayal, violence, and death. The wedding, once a symbol of hope and unity, now lies in ruin, its joy replaced by sorrow, its vows overshadowed by the dark secrets that tore them apart. The empty wedding venue, now a crime scene, echoes the silence of lives lost and a future destroyed. Nathaniel, the groom who had dreamed of a life filled with love, now sits alone, his tear-streaked face a reflection of the profound loss and regret that weighs heavily on his heart. This was a night where love turned to hatred, trust gave way to betrayal, and life was stolen by the very hands that once promised to protect it. As we look back on the events of this night, we are left to grapple with the broader implications of this tragic tale. Sophia, Kayla, and Nathaniel were all victims of their circumstances, of societal pressures, hidden desires, and the secrets they believed they had to keep. But those very secrets, buried beneath layers of shame and fear, became the catalysts for their destruction. What does this story tell us about the human condition, about the ways we navigate love, loyalty, and identity in a world that often forces us to choose between our true selves and the roles we are expected to play? The wedding rings, once symbols of unity, now lie discarded, broken representations of the union that was meant to be, but never truly existed. And there, in the midst of it all, stands Nathaniel, isolated and alone, facing the unbearable consequences of actions driven by heartbreak and rage. This story forces us to confront the devastating effects of betrayal, the weight of secrets, and the ultimate cost of living a life that is not entirely our own. In the end, we are reminded of the serious consequences that arise from betrayal and the hidden lives we lead. The events of this night serve as a stark warning of how quickly love can turn to hatred and how easily the bonds of trust can be shattered by secrets too painful to keep. As we close this, we leave you with this final thought. In a world where the truth is often hidden beneath layers of deception, what are the risks we take by living a life that is not true to who we are? And when those secrets come to light, who bears the ultimate cost? This is a story of love lost, trust betrayed, and lives irrevocably changed. A story that lingers long after the last word is spoken, urging us to reflect on the choices we make, the lives we lead, and the people we choose to be. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe for more life stories that encourage reflection and inspire discussion. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that sparks conversation and introspection.